She didn't scream, she didn't slam the door, throw a glass, or send that long, paragraph-heavy final text you were secretly waiting for so you could argue back. There was no grand explosion, no dramatic exit, and no last-ditch effort to make you see her side. She just stopped. And that silence is more terrifying than any scream she could have ever let out. It is a heavy, suffocating quiet that fills the rooms of your life where her laughter and her concern used to live. You might have mistaken this silence for peace at first, thinking you finally won the argument or that she's finally calmed down. But you're realizing now that this isn't the silence of submission. It's the silence of a grave. It's the sound of a woman who has officially run out of things to say to someone who never truly listened. That silence is louder than every argument you ever had, because it signals the exact moment she stopped believing you were worth the breath it takes to explain herself. You spent years watching her fight for the relationship, watching her try to bridge the gap between your actions and her needs, and you grew comfortable with that effort. You mistook her struggle for her standard operating procedure. You thought her warmth was a permanent natural resource, like the sun rising in the morning, something you could just count on without ever having to fuel it yourself. You assumed her heart was a well that would never run dry, no matter how much you dipped into it and how little you poured back in. You were dead wrong. While you were busy being complacent, she was hitting the rock bottom of her own endurance. By the time the realization finally hits you, that cold, sinking feeling in your gut that something is fundamentally broken, it's usually already over. While you were waiting for her to get over it, she was quietly moving her furniture out of the mental home she built for you. She has already started the process of reconstruction. She's looking at her future, her goals, and her happiness. And for the first time in a long time, you aren't even in the blueprint. She isn't just pulling away, she's evaporating. What happens to the mind and soul of an empathic woman when she finally decides to stop giving? This isn't just a personality change or a bad mood. It's a total systemic shutdown. If you are feeling that icy shift in the air right now, pay close attention. For many of you, the warning signs have already passed, and you're standing in the wreckage of a too late you never saw coming. The world has a dangerous habit of underestimating this woman. Society looks at her kindness, her patience, and her ability to forgive, and it labels her as soft. And in a world that prizes aggression and ego, soft is often used as a synonym for weak. They see her as someone who is easy to push, easy to ignore, and even easier to take for granted. But what they fail to understand is that her softness isn't a lack of spine. It's the ultimate display of strength. It takes a massive amount of internal power to remain open in a world that is constantly trying to shut you down. She is the one who feels the invisible weight of every room she walks into. She doesn't just hear the words you say, she hears the pain you're hiding, the grief you haven't processed, and the shadows you think no one can see. She's been reading you're fine and knowing it's a lie for as long as you've known her. For years, she didn't just live alongside you, she served as your emotional infrastructure. She was the foundation that held up your ego when it was crumbling. She was the one who looked at you and saw the man you could be, even when you were showing her exactly who you actually were. She reflected your potential back to you like a mirror, giving you the confidence to navigate the world because she was holding the flashlight. She sat in the trenches with you, tending to your wounds and absorbing your stress, all while her own heart was quietly bleeding from 1,000 small cuts you never bothered to notice. You leaned on her so heavily and for so long that you forgot she was a human being with her own gravity. You started to treat her like a utility, like the electricity or the water, something that is only noticed when it's suddenly cut off. Here is the hard truth that most people realize too late. People mistake her consistency for a guarantee. They think because she stayed through the last mistake, the last neglect, and the last broken promise, she will stay through the next one. They draw water from her well every single day, taking her empathy, her labor, and her love without ever stopping to ask if she's thirsty. They assume she is inexhaustible. But every well has a bottom, every battery has a limit, and when an empathic woman finally hits that absolute floor, a switch flips that cannot be unflipped. She undergoes a neurological and psychological shift so profound that it reshapes her entire reality. When she finally stands back up, she isn't the woman you knew. She looks the same, she sounds the same, but the person who used to care about your approval is gone. She has become a stranger wearing a familiar face, and no amount of pleading can bring the old version of her back. This is the part of the journey where the mask of softness finally falls away to reveal the titanium beneath. We need to talk about the massive, fundamental mistake people make when they deal with a woman who leads with her heart. They see her patience, they see her willingness to give the benefit of the doubt, and they mistake that for a lack of options. They look at her softness and they think it's a weakness they can exploit, a cushion they can kick, or a safety net that will always be there to catch them when they mess up. But what the world fails to realize is that her softness is actually her greatest power. It's a choice. It takes an incredible, almost superhuman level of strength to remain open and kind in a world that is constantly trying to turn people cold. She isn't nice because she's afraid of conflict. She's kind because she has a surplus of emotional courage. She is the person who feels the invisible weight of every room she walks into. She doesn't just hear the words you're saying, she feels the vibrations of the things you're hiding. She picks up on your quiet grief, your hidden insecurities, and the shadows you think you've tucked away where nobody can see them. She has been your silent partner in a battle you didn't even know she was fighting for you. For years, she didn't just love you, she functioned as your emotional infrastructure. Think about that for a second. She was the foundation that kept your life from collapsing when things got hard. When you were at your absolute worst, when you were failing or feeling small, she was the one reflecting your potential back to you. She saw the version of you that you couldn't even see yourself. She acted like a human mirror, showing you your strength, while she quietly absorbed your stress, your anger, and your neglect. She sat in the darkness with you, holding your wounds with gentle hands, all while she was quietly bleeding from her own cuts that you never bothered to ask about. You became so used to her being your support system that you started to treat her like a background utility. You treated her like the oxygen in the room, something you just breathe in and expect to be there, without ever wondering where it comes from or what happens if the supply runs out. You assumed she was a permanent fixture, an endless resource that you could tap into whenever you felt empty, without ever having to pour anything back in. But here is the truth that will haunt you. Consistency is not a guarantee. Just because she was there yesterday and the day before and through every mistake you ever made does not mean she will be there tomorrow. You kept drawing water from her well every single day, taking her energy, her time, and her peace, and you never once stopped to look down and see if the water level was dropping. Well, it was, and it has finally hit the bottom. When an empathic woman reaches that point of total depletion, something happens inside her brain and her soul that is almost impossible to reverse. It's a neurological dead switch that flips to save her life. She doesn't just get tired or upset. She undergoes a total systemic shift. She stops being the mirror that reflects your greatness and starts being the wall that reflects your reality. When she finally stands up and walks away, she isn't the same person you met. The warmth is gone, the give is gone, and the woman who once cared about your opinion or your excuses has been replaced by a stranger. She might look like the woman you knew, she might sound like her, but the version of her that belonged to you is dead. She has rebuilt herself from the inside out, and in her new blueprint, there is no room for someone who only knew how to take. When an empathic woman finally clears out the clutter of everyone else's needs, she discovers something she hasn't felt in years, a terrifying, absolute quiet. For so long, her internal world was a crowded switchboard, buzzing with your problems, your moods, and your demands. Her entire identity was wrapped up in being the helper, the fixer, or the emotional glue that held everything together. She knew who she was only in relation to what she could do for you. So when she finally stops, the silence feels like a void. She looks in the mirror and has to face a haunting question. Without someone to save, who am I? This is the space between, the gap between the woman she was forced to be and the woman she is actually meant to become. It's a period of deep uncertainty, but it is the most fertile ground she has ever stood on. This silence isn't emptiness, it is space. It's the room she finally has to breathe, to think, and to exist without having to ask for permission or check the room's temperature. For the first time in a decade, she isn't building a life that accommodates your ego or shrinks to fit your insecurities. She is building a life that actually fits her. This shows up in the way she moves and speaks. She stops smoothing things over to keep you comfortable. She stops translating her truths into softer versions just so you won't get defensive. She becomes what psychologists call grounded. You'll notice she seems different, strangely warmer, yet significantly less available. She's no longer performing care to keep the peace. She is inhabiting her own peace. She isn't your 24/7 emotional support animal anymore. She is the architect of her own joy. We have to talk about the grief, because this is the part that people, especially the ones she left behind, completely misunderstand. You might think she's grieving the loss of the relationship or the loss of you. She isn't. She is grieving the loss of herself. She is mourning the woman she used to be, the one who stayed too long, gave too much, and asked for too little. It's a heavy, visceral pain that comes from looking back at years of emotional investment and finally seeing the math. She's looking at the ledger of her life and realizing she gave herself away in tiny, daily pieces to people who accepted the gift but never actually bothered to see the giver. She is grieving the time she'll never get back and the versions of herself she sacrificed to keep your world from falling apart. But don't mistake this grief for regret or a desire to return to the way things were. Through this pain, she is forging something called earned clarity. This is the moment she wakes up. She doesn't become bitter or hateful. Bitterness is just another way of staying attached to the past. Instead, she becomes awake. Her intuition, which she spent years suppressing to keep you happy, is now her sharpest weapon. She can smell a manipulator from a mile away. She can feel a relational imbalance before the first lie is even out of your mouth. She isn't being suspicious or difficult. She's just no longer blind. She has seen the pattern, she has felt the cost, and she has survived the fire. You can't trick a woman who has already stared down her own destruction and decided she was worth saving. When an empathic woman emerges from the wreckage of her own depletion, she doesn't just move on, she upgrades her entire operating system. If you are the person who lost her, you need to understand one thing clearly. She is not coming back for the same version of the story you used to write together. She isn't looking for convenience. She isn't looking for a comfort fix. And she definitely isn't looking for loneliness relief. Those are the baits people use to reel a woman back into a lopsided dynamic, but they don't work on her anymore. She has reached what psychologists call earned secure attachment. This means she has done the grueling internal work to anchor her value within herself rather than in how much she can do for you. She finally knows, at a cellular level, that her worth is not a negotiation. It's a fact. She is still open to genuine connection. Her heart hasn't turned to stone, but she is now utterly unwilling to accept a simulation of love. She will no longer settle for a relationship that looks good on the outside, but feels like a desert on the inside. The world was very comfortable with her when she was the woman who gave everything and asked for nothing. Society, friends, and partners all love a woman who pours from an empty cup, because it means they never have to worry about their own thirst. But the world doesn't quite know what to do with a woman who knows her own value. When she starts setting boundaries, when she starts saying no to things that drain her, and when she demands reciprocity, people often label her as difficult or cold. But she isn't being difficult, she's being honest. She has moved from being a giver to being a guardian. She is now the protector of her own peace, the bouncer at the door of her own heart. She understands that her empathy is a high-value currency, and she has stopped handing it out to people who treat it like pocket change. She has built a new standard, not out of arrogance, but out of a deep necessity for survival. If you are the one standing in the wake of her departure, stop framing this as something she did to you. Stop playing the victim in a story where you were the one holding the pen. You need to look at the reality of the situation. The way you treated her made her abandonment of herself inevitable. For her to stay the old her, she would have had to keep dying in small ways every single day just to keep you comfortable. She didn't leave because she stopped loving. She left because she finally chose her own life over the slow suffocation of yours. This wasn't a snap decision or a moment of temporary insanity. It was an act of self-rescue. She realized that if she didn't choose herself, no one else would. You probably won't feel the full weight of this loss today. You might even feel a sense of relief or a bit of ego-driven anger. But wait, give it a few months. The weight will hit you when the silence in your life starts to feel heavy. It will hit you when you realize that her attentive presence, the way she listened, the way she anticipated your needs, the way she made you feel like the only person in the world, wasn't a standard human feature. It wasn't something you can just go out and find in the next person. It was a specific, rare, and intentional gift that she specifically chose to give you. It was a luxury you were receiving for free, and you treated it like it was cheap. Now that the gift has been withdrawn, you're going to realize just how cold the world feels without her fire to warm you. And the hardest part? You'll know exactly why she took it away. I want to speak directly to the woman who is in the middle of this transformation right now. You might be feeling guilty. You might be listening to the voices of people telling you that you've changed, that you've become hard or cold. Do not believe them. You aren't becoming cold. You are becoming a guardian. For your entire life, you've been taught that your value lies in how much you can sacrifice. But you are finally learning the difference between service and self-erasure. You are learning to care from a place of surplus, not scarcity. You aren't giving because you have to, or because you're afraid of being disliked. You are giving because you choose to, and only to those who have proven they can hold the gift with respect. You haven't lost your empathy. That's impossible. It's part of who you are. What you've finally done is given that empathy a home. You've built a house with walls and a door that locks, so that your kindness is no longer a public park where anyone can walk in and leave their trash behind. You are learning that no is a complete sentence, and that your peace is worth more than someone else's comfort. You are moving into the most powerful version of yourself, the one that is whole, the one that is clear, and the one that is finely, beautifully, uncompromisingly free. You haven't lost your heart. You've just finally decided to be its first and most loyal protector.